The crack of a gunshot echoed through the Montana Valley as the wheel of Amelia Grayson's wagon splintered, sending the vehicle careening off the rutted trail. The year was 1876, and the 24-year-old schoolteacher's journey west had just taken a turn for the worse as her wagon toppled onto its side with a sickening crunch, pinning her beneath its heavy wooden frame. "Help!" Amelia cried out, her voice swallowed by the vast emptiness of the frontier. The pain in her leg was excruciating, and dust filled her lungs as she struggled to free herself from the crushing weight. Her faithful horse had broken free and bolted at the sound of the gunshot, leaving her alone on the desolate trail. Bandits had taken aim at her wagon from the ridge above, but apparently decided a lone woman with a broken-down wagon wasn't worth the trouble of descending to rob. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly as Amelia's consciousness began to fade. The beautiful mountains that had earlier filled her with hope now seemed to mock her predicament. Just as her eyes began to close, the rhythmic pounding of hooves reached her ears. "Madam, can you hear me?" A deep voice cut through her haze of pain. "Hold on, I'm going to get you out." Through blurred vision, Amelia saw a tall figure dismount from a chestnut stallion. The man's face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out piercing blue eyes filled with concern. "My leg," she managed to whisper, her throat dry from dust and fear. The cowboy assessed the situation quickly. "The wagon's pinning you down. I'm going to lift it, but it's going to hurt when the pressure comes off. Are you ready?" Amelia nodded weakly, and the stranger positioned himself at the edge of the wagon. With a deep breath, he braced his shoulders against the wooden frame and pushed upward with a primal grunt of exertion. The muscles in his arms strained beneath his worn cotton shirt as the wagon shifted inch by inch. "Can you pull yourself free?" he asked through gritted teeth. Amelia summoned her remaining strength and dragged herself from beneath the wagon, crying out as pain shot through her injured leg. The moment she was clear, the cowboy carefully lowered the wagon and rushed to her side. "Those shots came from the ridge," he said, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Without hesitation, he scooped Amelia into his arms as though she weighed nothing. She caught the scent of leather, horses, and pine as he carried her to his waiting stallion. "I'm Blake Weston," he said, settling her onto his saddle before mounting behind her. "I've got a cabin about an hour's ride from here. We can tend to that leg and you'll be safe from those bandits." "Amelia Grayson," she replied, fighting to stay conscious as they set off. "I was headed to Silver Creek to take up a teaching position." "Silver Creek," Blake's voice held a note of surprise. "That's where I'm from. Looks like fate has its own plans today, Miss Grayson." As they rode across the wild landscape, Amelia found herself leaning back against Blake's chest, his strong arms keeping her secure as the world around her faded to black. When Amelia awoke, she was lying on a simple but clean bed in a small, neat cabin. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. Her leg had been bandaged, and her dress replaced with an oversized shirt that she assumed belonged to her rescuer. "You're awake." Blake's voice came from the doorway where he stood holding a steaming mug. I was starting to worry. In the warm light of the cabin, Amelia could finally see her savior clearly. Blake Weston was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years under the Montana sky. His jawline was strong beneath several days' worth of stubble, and those striking blue eyes that had been her first clear memory were framed by laugh lines. "How long was I unconscious?" she asked, attempting to sit up. "Most of the day," Blake replied, crossing to her side and offering the mug. "It's just willow bark tea should help with the pain. Your leg isn't broken, thankfully, but it's badly bruised." "Thank you," Amelia said, accepting the tea, "for everything. If you hadn't come along when you did." "Just happened to be in the right place," Blake said with a modest shrug. "I was tracking those bandits. They've been causing trouble for weeks now." "Are you a lawman?" Amelia asked, taking in his weathered appearance. Blake's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "No, madam, just a rancher who's tired of having cattle stolen and travelers harassed." "The nearest sheriff is 3 days' ride away in Butte City." As Amelia sipped the bitter tea, she studied the cabin. It was simple but surprisingly homey. Books lined a rough shelf against one wall, unusual for a frontier rancher, and hand-carved figures of horses adorned the mantel. "You're a long way from Silver Creek," Blake commented, pulling a chair near the bed. "It's another 2 days' journey from here." "The stagecoach only went as far as Fort Russell," Amelia explained. "I purchased the wagon there, and you were traveling alone." There was no judgment in Blake's voice, only concern. Amelia lifted her chin slightly. "I'm quite capable, Mr. Weston, or at least I thought I was until those bandits proved otherwise." "Blake," he corrected with a gentle smile, "and I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Grayson. It's just that Montana territory isn't always kind to even the most capable folks." "Amelia," she offered in return, finding herself drawn to his straightforward manner, "and I'm learning that lesson rather painfully." The next morning, Amelia woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Using a walking stick Blake had fashioned for her, she made her way to the main room of the cabin where he was tending to breakfast. "Morning," he greeted, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "How's the leg?" "Better," Amelia said, though it still throbbed with each step. "Your willow bark tea seems to have helped." "My mother's remedy," Blake explained, dishing up a plate for her. She knew every healing plant in Montana territory. As they ate, Blake explained that he'd need to ride out to check on his cattle and see if he could salvage anything from her wagon. "I've got a spare horse you can use once you're healed up. We can head to Silver Creek together." "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose," Amelia said, though the thought of traveling alone again made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "No imposition," Blake said firmly. "I need to make the trip anyway. Got business with the mercantile owner." When Blake rode out later that morning, Amelia explored the cabin more thoroughly. Despite its rustic appearance, there were touches that spoke of refinement: the books on botany and poetry, a violin case in the corner, sketches of landscapes pinned to one wall. Blake Weston was clearly more than the simple cowboy he appeared to be. She was examining one of the sketches when she noticed the signature. B. Weston, Harvard University, 1866. Amelia's eyebrows rose in surprise. A Harvard-educated rancher in the wilds of Montana was not what she had expected. When Blake returned that evening, he brought with him her trunk from the wagon, though the vehicle itself had been too damaged to salvage. "Your horse is safe too," he reported. "Found him grazing about a mile from where you crashed. He's in the corral with mine." "Thank you," Amelia said sincerely. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Blake waved away her gratitude. "No debt between neighbors, Amelia. We'll be working in the same town soon enough." As they sat by the fire that evening, Amelia gathered her courage. "I saw your Harvard sketch," she admitted. "I hope you don't mind my prying." Blake was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "No, I don't mind. Seems like a lifetime ago now." "What brought a Harvard man to ranching in Montana?" she asked gently. "The war," he said simply. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to lecture halls and debates, needed open sky and honest work." He paused, then added, "My father was furious, expected me to join his law practice in Boston." "And yet you have books of poetry here," Amelia observed. Blake's smile was tinged with something like wistfulness. "Some parts of education stick with you, I suppose. What about you? What brings a young woman to teach in a frontier town?" Amelia thought of the life she'd left behind in Pennsylvania. "After my parents died, there wasn't much left for me. I wanted to go somewhere I could make a difference." They talked late into the night, discovering shared interests in literature and music. Blake even took out the violin, playing a haunting melody that seemed to embody the wild beauty of the Montana landscape. Over the next week, as Amelia's leg healed, they fell into an easy routine. Blake would tend to his ranch duties in the morning while Amelia prepared meals and sometimes attempted to help with simple chores. In the evenings, they would read aloud to each other or simply talk about their lives and dreams. Amelia found herself watching Blake when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved confidently, whether he was mending a fence or turning the pages of a book, the way the sun had lightened streaks in his dark hair, the thoughtful expression he wore when he was listening to her speak. For his part, Blake seemed to find reasons to be near her, offering an arm for support when she walked outside, bringing her wildflowers he'd found while checking his cattle, listening with genuine interest to her ideas for teaching in Silver Creek. It was on the 8th day when everything changed. Blake had ridden out before dawn to track a mountain lion that had been threatening his cattle. The weather had turned unexpectedly, and by midday, dark clouds were gathering over the mountains. Amelia watched anxiously from the cabin door as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. By late afternoon, the rain had become a deluge, and there was still no sign of Blake. Despite her healing leg, she found herself pacing the cabin, jumping at every sound that might herald his return. When the cabin door finally burst open, Blake stumbled in soaking wet and clutching his arm, which was wrapped in a blood-soaked handkerchief. "Blake," Amelia rushed to him, helping him to a chair. "What happened?" "Found the lion," he grimaced. "He wasn't too happy about it." Amelia quickly gathered clean cloths and the medical supplies Blake kept in a wooden box. As she unwrapped his arm, she revealed deep gashes that could only have come from powerful claws. "These need to be cleaned and stitched," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Do you have any whiskey?" Blake nodded toward a cabinet, behind the flour sack. Amelia worked methodically, first cleaning the wounds with whiskey, which drew a sharp intake of breath from Blake, but no other sound of pain, then carefully stitching the deepest gashes with needle and thread she sterilized in the flame of a candle. "You've done this before," Blake observed, watching her steady hands. "My father was a doctor," Amelia explained. "He insisted I learn basic medical care." When she finished, she looked up to find Blake watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. Their faces were inches apart, and for a moment neither moved. "Amelia," Blake said softly, his voice rough with something more than pain. The moment was shattered by a crash of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the cabin. Blake stood abruptly, wincing as the movement pulled at his fresh stitches. "Storm's getting worse," he said, moving to check that the windows were secure. "The creek might flood. We should bring the horses to the higher pasture." Together they ventured into the downpour, leading the nervous horses to safety. By the time they returned to the cabin, they were both drenched and shivering. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Blake said, stoking the fire to a roaring blaze. "I'll step outside while you change." "Don't be ridiculous," Amelia said, concerned for his injured arm. "You're hurt and it's pouring rain. Turn your back." They awkwardly maneuvered around each other, changing into dry clothing with their backs turned. But as Amelia was fastening the buttons of her dress, she felt Blake's presence behind her. "Let me help," he said quietly, his fingers brushing against her neck as he secured the top buttons she couldn't reach. Amelia turned slowly to face him, acutely aware of his proximity. Rain pattered against the roof and wind howled outside, but in the cabin, there was only the crackling of the fire and the sound of their breathing. "Thank you for saving my life," she whispered. "I think perhaps it's the other way around," Blake replied, his eyes dropping to her lips. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Amelia answered by winding her arms around his neck, being careful of his injured arm and drawing him closer. The storm raged through the night, but they barely noticed, lost in conversation and tender touches. Blake told her about his experiences in the war, the nightmares that had driven him west, the peace he'd found in the mountains. Amelia shared her fears of failing as a teacher, her loneliness after her parents' deaths, her determination to build a new life. By morning, when the storm had passed and sunlight streamed through the windows, something fundamental had shifted between them. As they prepared to make the journey to Silver Creek the following day, Amelia found herself dreading the moment when they would reach the town and their time alone together would end. "What will happen when we reach Silver Creek?" she asked as they packed supplies for the journey. Blake paused, looking at her with those penetrating blue eyes. "That depends on you, Amelia. I have a small house in town, separate from the ranch. I stay there when business keeps me in Silver Creek." "And where will I stay?" she asked, holding her breath. "The school has accommodations for the teacher," Blake said carefully. But I find I'm not eager to see you installed there," he admitted. "These past days with you have been, I've never met anyone like you, Amelia." Amelia's heart thundered in her chest. "I feel the same way." Blake crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I know this is sudden. Too sudden, perhaps, but out here life doesn't always give you the luxury of time. When I saw you trapped under that wagon, something inside me knew my life was about to change. Blake, are you? I'm not proposing, he said quickly, then smiled. Not yet, anyway. I'm just asking for a chance to court you properly once we reach Silver Creek, to see if what we've found here might grow into something more. Relief and joy flooded through Amelia. I would like that very much. Their journey to Silver Creek took 2 days, traveling at a leisurely pace to accommodate Amelia's healing leg. They camped beneath the stars, and Blake pointed out constellations, telling her the stories his mother had taught him, a mixture of classical mythology and Native American legends she had learned from the Blackfoot people who had once helped her family survive a harsh winter. As they rode, Blake showed her the beauty of the territory, hidden waterfalls, meadows carpeted with wildflowers, herds of bison in the distance. Amelia found herself falling in love not just with the man, but with the wild, untamed land that had shaped him. When they finally crested the last hill and Silver Creek came into view, Amelia felt a flutter of anxiety. The town was larger than she'd expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them, and scattered houses spreading outward toward surrounding ranches. "Welcome to your new home," Blake said, watching her reaction carefully. As they rode down the main street, Amelia was aware of curious glances from townspeople. A woman arriving with Blake Weston was clearly cause for interest. They stopped first at the school, a neat white building with a bell tower. The mayor, Albert Thompson, was summoned, and he greeted Amelia with surprise and delight. "Miss Grayson, we'd given up hope when you didn't arrive on schedule. We feared the worst." Miss Grayson had an unfortunate encounter with bandits, Blake explained. "Her wagon was destroyed, but fortunately I was nearby." The mayor's eyebrows rose as he looked between them. "Well, we're certainly glad you've arrived safely. The children have been without proper schooling for months." After showing Amelia the school and the attached living quarters, a small but comfortable apartment with a separate entrance, the mayor excused himself to spread the news of the teacher's arrival. "It's nice," Amelia said, looking around the simply furnished rooms, "but it feels empty." Blake suggested. She nodded. "After your cabin, it seems too proper," Blake laughed. "Give it time, you'll make it your own." Over the next few weeks, Amelia threw herself into her new role as Silver Creek schoolteacher. The children, ranging from 6 to 16, were eager to learn, if somewhat unruly after months without formal education. She found she loved the challenge, adapting her lessons to engage both the youngest pupils and the older students who would soon leave school for adult responsibilities. True to his word, Blake courted her with an old-fashioned formality that charmed her. He would call at her quarters with flowers or books, escort her to church on Sundays, and introduce her to the community. They took rides together on weekends, exploring the surrounding countryside and getting to know each other better. The town watched their courtship with interest, and for the most part, approval. Blake Weston was well respected in Silver Creek, known for his fair dealings, generosity in hard times, and the way he'd stood up to cattle barons who tried to force smaller ranchers off their land. Not everyone was pleased, however. Caroline Fletcher, the widow who owned the town's only hotel, had apparently set her sights on Blake before Amelia's arrival. Her cool reception and subtle barbs whenever they encountered each other made it clear that Amelia had made at least one enemy in her new home. "Don't mind Caroline," advised Martha Reynolds, the friendly wife of the general store owner, when she noticed the widow's cold behavior. "She's been trying to get Blake to notice her for years. Has he ever?" Amelia left the question unfinished. Martha shook her head emphatically. "Never. Blake's been keeping to himself since he came here after the war. Until you arrived, that is. I've never seen him like this, smiling, joining in socials. You've been good for him." 4 months after her arrival in Silver Creek, Blake invited Amelia to Sunday dinner at his ranch. It was the first time she'd been to his main property rather than his small townhouse, and she found herself nervous as they rode up to the sprawling ranch house nestled against the foothills. "This is not what I expected," Amelia admitted as they dismounted. The house was substantial 2 stories of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around it, flower gardens spreading out from the front, and a view of mountains and grazing land that took her breath away. "It's been in progress for years," Blake explained, suddenly seeming self-conscious. "I started with just the cabin you stayed in, but each year I added a bit more." Inside, the house was a perfect blend of frontier practicality and unexpected refinement. Comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes, paintings of Montana landscapes, and large windows that framed the spectacular views. "You've created something beautiful here," Amelia said sincerely. "It was always missing something, though," Blake replied, watching her with those intense blue eyes. "Or someone." After dinner, they walked along a creek that ran through the property, stopping at a bench positioned to catch the sunset over the mountains. "I brought you here for a reason, Amelia," Blake said, taking her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life." Amelia's heart began to race as Blake knelt before her, still holding her hands. "I know we haven't known each other long by Eastern standards," he said. "But out here, we measure time differently. I knew from the moment I carried you away from that broken wagon that my life would never be the same." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Amelia Grayson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Amelia said without hesitation, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Yes, Blake, I will marry you." He slipped a ring onto her finger, a gold band set with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman as strong and kind as she was." "I'll try to be worthy of it," Amelia promised. "You already are," Blake assured her, rising to kiss her. Their wedding took place 2 months later in Silver Creek's white clapboard church. The entire town turned out for the event, even Caroline Fletcher, who had gradually warmed to Amelia after seeing how genuinely happy Blake was. Amelia wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha Reynolds had helped her make, and Blake looked handsome in a new black suit. As they exchanged vows, Amelia thought of how far she had come from that terrifying moment trapped beneath the wagon. What had seemed like disaster had led her to this moment of perfect happiness. The school board agreed to let Amelia continue teaching after her marriage, an unusual arrangement, but one that suited both the town and the newlyweds. During the week, they often stayed in Blake's townhouse, which they had expanded to accommodate Amelia's books and teaching materials. Weekends and school holidays were spent at the ranch, where Amelia had started a garden that combined ornamental flowers with medicinal herbs, drawing on both her father's medical knowledge and Blake's mother's botanical notebooks. Their first year of marriage brought challenges. A harsh winter threatened Blake's cattle, and Amelia contracted a serious fever that left her bedridden for weeks. But they faced each difficulty together, finding that their bond only strengthened through adversity. In the spring of their second year of marriage, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows around their ranch, Amelia shared news that brought tears of joy to Blake's eyes. They would be welcoming a child by the autumn harvest. "A family," Blake said in wonder, his hand gently resting on Amelia's still flat stomach. "Something I never thought I'd have. We've come so far from that day on the trail," Amelia mused, covering his hand with her own. "Sometimes I think about what might have happened if those bandits hadn't shot at my wagon. I believe we would have found each other somehow," Blake said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be." Their daughter, Eleanor, was born as the first snow of winter dusted the mountain peaks. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. As Blake held his newborn daughter, looking at his wife with adoration, he reflected on how a moment of crisis had led to a lifetime of joy. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William, and their family was complete. The ranch prospered, and the school in Silver Creek gained a reputation for excellence under Amelia's guidance. When Eleanor was old enough to start lessons, Amelia hired an assistant teacher to help while she divided her time between her family and her calling. On the 5th anniversary of the day Blake had found Amelia trapped beneath the wagon, he surprised her with a special gift, a detailed sketch of their family standing before the ranch house, with the mountains rising majestically behind them. "You've given me a life I never imagined possible," he told her as they stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard. When I left Harvard, I thought I was leaving behind everything my father valued: position, intellect, culture. I thought ranching would be simple, straightforward. And instead, Amelia prompted, leaning against his shoulder, instead I found something far more complex and rewarding. This land, this life, and then you. Blake kissed her tenderly. When I lifted that wagon off you, I had no idea I was really saving myself. Amelia smiled up at the man who had transformed her life with an act of courage and kindness. We saved each other, she corrected him gently, and we'll keep doing so every day for the rest of our lives. As the sun set behind the Montana mountains, painting the sky in brilliant gold and crimson, Blake and Amelia Weston stood together, watching their children and contemplating the beautiful future that had begun with a broken wagon and a cowboy's strength, both physical and of heart, on a dusty trail in the wild Montana territory.